I knew something was wrong the moment I smelled fresh asphalt where gravel should have been. The heat hit my face before I even stepped out of the truck. That thick,
Yes, the water
burnt
line
tar
runs
smell
just here.
clinging to the morning air like it didn't belong here. Like it was rewriting something that had
That's the
stood
corner.
untouched for
The hedges
decades.
are looking
My
particularly
tires
vibrant
rolled
today.
slower than
Yes,
usual,
character A, they
crunch
are.
replaced by
Just
a
need to
dull,
ensure everyone is
sticky hum.
compliant with the trim
And that's
height,
when
of
I
course.
saw it.
Keep up the good
Black
work.
pavement stretching clean and smooth over my
We have every
driveway,
right to
my
be here.
private road,
I understand,
the one
but
my
we
father
followed
had built with
procedure.
his own
We
hands
just need you
32
both to
years ago.
cooperate.
A bright white sign stood at the edge,
What is
bolted
going
into
on
the
here?
ground like it had
Just some
every
legal
right to be
notices.
there.
But there are
Future
so many.
community
They've
access
closed the
road.
road.
I just sat there
You
for
need
a
to turn
second,
back.
engine idling,
This is
fingers
private
tight
property
on the
now.
steering wheel,
We'll be
watching
back.
a steamroller crawl
you won't.
forward like
This
it
is
owned
over.
place. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and that road? That road is the only way in or out of my property. 3 acres of land just outside Austin that's been in my family longer than most of the houses in that HOA even existed. My dad used to say land doesn't lie. That line's drawn on paper matter more than anything someone says with a smile. I guess Margaret Holloway never heard that. She showed up 5 minutes later, right on cue, stepping out of her white SUV like she was arriving at a ribbon-cutting ceremony instead of trespassing on private property. Perfect posture, polished voice, that same calm, rehearsed tone people use when they think they've already won. "Ethan," she said, like we were neighbors sharing coffee instead of standing on opposite sides of something that felt a lot more permanent. "We're upgrading access for the community." Community. That word tasted worse than the asphalt in the air. Behind her, 2 guys in safety vests were pulling up what used to be my survey markers, tossing them aside like broken sticks. I walked past her without saying a word, boots sticking slightly to the fresh surface, heat radiating up through the soles like the ground itself was trying to warn me. "You can't just pave over private property," I said finally, my voice steady even though I could feel that slow burn building in my chest. She smiled. Not wide, not loud, just enough to make it clear she thought I didn't understand something she did. "It's already been approved," she said, tapping a folder in her hand like that settled everything. Approved by who? She didn't say. Didn't need to. I could already see how this was going to play out. The paperwork, the notices, the fees, the slow pressure designed to make people fold. A security guard rolled up in a golf cart, stopping right where my gravel used to meet the county road. He looked at me, then at her, then back at me. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify your access authorization," he said, like he was reading off a script he didn't fully believe. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Standing on my own land, being asked for permission to enter it. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a mistake. This was a takeover. And Margaret? She wasn't just building a road. She was building control. What she didn't know was that my father didn't just leave me this land. He left me something buried a lot deeper than gravel. I did not argue with her again that morning because arguing would have meant she still thought this was a conversation, and it was not. The hum of that steamroller stayed in my ears long after I shut my truck door, a low mechanical growl that felt like it was settling into my bones. I walked the length of what used to be my gravel driveway, counting steps the same way my dad taught me when I was 10 years old, heel to toe, measuring distance without a tape, memorizing every inch like it mattered, because it always did. The surface was still soft in spots, heat rising in waves, and I could feel it through my boots, that unnatural smoothness replacing the uneven crunch I had grown up with. 32 years of tire tracks, rain grooves, and worn stone erased in less than a day. I knelt down near the edge where the asphalt met the dry grass and brushed my fingers along the boundary line, the place where the county map said my property ended and the subdivision began. Except that line was gone now, buried under fresh tar and someone else's assumption of authority. By the time I got back to the house, there was already a white envelope taped to my front door, the paper stiff, edges sharp like it had just come off a printer. I did not need to open it to know what it was, but I did anyway, standing there with the morning sun hitting the back of my neck and the faint smell of diesel drifting in from the road. Community Improvement Assessment. It read in bold letters, followed by a breakdown of charges that made my jaw tighten without me realizing it. $3,200 for paving, $85 a month for maintenance, 30 days to comply or face additional penalties. They had paved my road, erased my boundary, and then billed me for the privilege of losing it. I let out a slow breath and looked back toward the entrance where that new sign stood, already catching sunlight like it had been there for years instead of hours. A black SUV rolled past, tires gliding smoothly over the asphalt. No hesitation, no question, just using it. My road. Just like that. I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the wooden floor grounding me for half a second, and headed straight for the study. The air inside still carried that faint scent of old paper and cedar, the same as it had when my dad used to sit at that desk going over survey documents late into the night. The cabinet in the corner had not been touched in years, metal drawer slightly warped from humidity, handle cold in my hand as I pulled it open. Folders stacked tight, labeled in his handwriting, clean, deliberate, no wasted motion. I slid one out at random, then another, until I found the one I was looking for without even knowing why. Caldwell Property Survey, 1987. The paper inside was thick, edges yellowed just enough to show age but not neglect. I spread it across the desk, smoothing it flat with both hands, and for a moment everything outside went quiet in my head. Lines, angles, measurements in feet and inches. Every boundary marked with precision. And right there, cutting through the center like a spine, was that road. Not labeled as shared, not marked as access. Just one word printed clean and final. Private. I stared at it longer than I should have, the weight of it settling in slow, deliberate layers. Because this was not just a driveway. This was the only way in or out of that entire subdivision. Every car, every delivery, every emergency vehicle, all of it depended on a strip of land that belonged to me. I leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under the shift, and let the realization fully land. Margaret did not just pave a road. She tied her entire community to something she never owned. And that kind of mistake does not fix itself. I did not call a lawyer that day, and I did not call the county either because rushing in would have meant reacting, and reacting is exactly what people like Margaret expect. Instead, I folded that survey back along its original creases, slow and precise, the paper making that dry, familiar sound that always reminded me of late nights at this same desk with my father explaining why every line mattered. Outside, the low rumble of traffic had already started to build, tires moving over that new asphalt like it had always been there, like they had the right to it. I stepped back onto the porch and leaned against the railing, watching as a delivery van rolled in without hesitation, then a sedan, then another, each one following the same path, each one reinforcing the same quiet assumption. The air still carried that faint mix of tar and dust, and under it, something sharper, like fresh paint from the sign they had planted at the entrance. Future Community Access Road. The word future hung there like a promise they had made to themselves without ever asking me. By mid-afternoon, the next move came right on schedule. A second envelope, thicker this time, hand-delivered by a man in a pressed polo shirt with the HOA logo stitched on the chest. He did not meet my eyes when he handed it over, just nodded and stepped back like he had done this 100 times before. Inside were more pages, more numbers, more language designed to sound official enough that most people would not question it. Notice of compliance requirements. Access designation. Community right of use. Each phrase stacked on top of the next until it looked like authority, until it felt like something already decided. I flipped through it once, then set it down on the kitchen counter and let it sit there untouched. Because buried under all that paper was a single problem they could not write their way out of. They needed that road. Not just for convenience, but for everything. I drove down to the entrance just before sunset, the sky turning that deep orange that makes every surface look sharper, more defined. The new pavement reflected the light differently than gravel ever did, smooth and almost polished, like it was trying to impress someone. A small security booth had already been set up near the edge where my property met the subdivision. Temporary structure, metal frame, clipboard hanging on a hook inside. The same guard from earlier sat there, flipping through a binder like he was memorizing names. When he saw me, he straightened slightly, unsure which role he was supposed to play. "Sir, I am going to need to log your entry," he said, voice careful, rehearsed. I looked past him at the line of houses stretching out beyond, identical rooftops catching the last light of the day, each one connected by a road that no longer legally existed the way they thought it did. "Go ahead," I said, calm, almost casual. "Write it down." He hesitated for a second, then picked up his pen, scratching my name onto a page that should never have been there in the first place. I turned the truck around slowly and drove back up the road, feeling the smooth surface under my tires, memorizing it the same way I had memorized the gravel years ago, because now every inch of it meant something different. This was not just access anymore. This was leverage. And the more they used it, the deeper they stepped into something they could not undo. I did not stop them because stopping them would have ended it too early. Instead, I let them keep building, keep using, keep believing. Because the truth was already written in ink decades ago, and all I had to do now was decide when to show it. By the third morning, the road did not look new anymore. It looked established, like it had already been accepted into the routine of the neighborhood, and that was exactly what Margaret wanted. The early light stretched across the asphalt in long, clean lines, no cracks, no imperfections, just a smooth black strip connecting every house behind that entrance like a vein carrying something important. I stood at the edge of my property with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, watching as a school bus rolled through without slowing down, its tires hissing softly against the surface, the driver not even glancing at the sign because to him, this was just another road. That was the part most people missed. The longer something exists, the more people believe it belongs there. Around 8:30, I heard the low beep of a reversing truck and stepped closer to the fence line, or where the fence line used to be before they tore it out. A landscaping crew was unloading stacks of decorative stone near the entrance, lining up materials like they were finishing a project that had already been approved months ago. One of the workers glanced at me, then quickly looked away, the kind of look people give when they know they are standing somewhere they should not be, but they also know they are not the ones making the decisions. I walked down toward the entrance again, slow, deliberate, letting the gravel that still remained on the edges crunch under my boots like a reminder of what used to be there. The security guard was different this time, younger, nervous, adjusting his vest like it did not quite fit right. He held up a hand when he saw me, not aggressive, just uncertain. "Sir, residents only access point," he said, voice tight, like he had practiced that line in his head more than once. I stopped just short of the booth and looked at the clipboard hanging inside. Pages already filled with names, license plates, timestamps. A system, built in less than 72 hours. And what makes someone a resident? I asked, keeping my tone even. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the subdivision behind him, then back to me. "If they live in the community," he said finally. I nodded once, slow, like I was considering it, then stepped past him without another word. He did not try to stop me. That told me everything I needed to know. Authority only works when people believe in it. Inside the neighborhood, everything was already adjusting to the change. Kids riding bikes along the new pavement, wheels gliding instead of bouncing, parents walking dogs along edges that had never existed before. Conversations happening like this was a feature, not a theft. I could feel the shift in the air, subtle but real, that sense of ownership spreading outward from something that was never theirs to begin with. When I got back to the house, there was another letter waiting, this one certified, heavier, more official in tone. I opened it at the kitchen counter, the paper crisp, the language tighter, less friendly. Final notice of compliance. They had moved faster than I expected, pushing the timeline, applying pressure before anyone had time to question it. Additional fees, daily penalties, potential legal action. I read it once, then set it down next to the others, stacking them neatly like evidence instead of threats. Because the more they sent, the more they committed to a position they could not defend. I stepped back into the study and pulled that survey out again, laying it flat under the light, tracing the line of the road with my finger from the county boundary all the way to my front gate. Every foot measured, every angle recorded. My father used to say that land remembers even when people forget. I looked out the window toward the road, now busy with movement, noise, life that did not belong there yet felt completely at ease. Margaret thought she was building permanence. What she was really doing was creating dependence. And once something depends on you, you do not need to fight it. You just need to decide when to take it away. By the end of the week, the road was no longer a project, it was infrastructure, and that shift changed everything in a way most people could not see yet. The morning air had lost that sharp asphalt bite, replaced by something quieter, settled, like the land itself had stopped resisting. I stood near the edge where my original gravel still peeked through along the sides, thin gray lines pressed against the black surface like a memory refusing to disappear. Cars moved steadily now, Not just residents, but delivery trucks, service vans, even a landscaping trailer hauling equipment. Deeper into the subdivision, every tire that passed over that strip added weight to the same assumption that this road belonged to them. Around 10 in the morning, I noticed something new. Utility flags. Bright orange and blue markers pushed into the ground along the shoulder, spaced out in neat intervals, indicating future work. Water lines, fiber cable, maybe even gas. They were not just using the road anymore. They were expanding it, investing in it, building layers on top of something they never owned. I walked down to one of the markers and pulled it out slowly, the thin plastic rod sliding free with almost no resistance. The soil underneath was still loose from recent work, not settled, not claimed. I held the flag in my hand for a second, then pushed it back into place exactly where it had been. Let them keep going. That thought came easier now, more natural. Because the deeper they built, the harder the fall would be when reality caught up. Just after noon, Margaret showed up again. Same SUV, same controlled movements. But this time she did not walk over immediately. She stood near the entrance, talking to a man in a button-down shirt holding a tablet, both of them gesturing toward the road, toward the houses, toward the future they thought they had secured. I stayed where I was, watching from a distance, letting them talk, letting them believe they were planning something permanent. Eventually, she made her way over, heels clicking softly against the pavement, each step measured like she had already rehearsed this moment. "Ethan," she said, tone calm but tighter than before, like there was something underneath she did not want to show. "We have tried to handle this professionally." I did not respond right away. I let the silence stretch just enough to make her continue. "If you do not comply with the assessment and access agreement, we will proceed with legal enforcement," she added, holding my gaze this time, waiting for a reaction. I nodded once, slow, almost thoughtful. "You should do what you think is necessary," I said. No anger, no resistance, just a statement. That was not the answer she expected. I could see it in the slight shift of her expression, the way her shoulders stiffened just a fraction. People like Margaret rely on friction. They expect pushback. Without it, they do not know where they stand. "You understand this will not go away," she pressed. I looked past her at the road, at the steady stream of cars moving in and out, at the markers, the signs, the systems already forming around something they assumed was theirs. "I know," I said quietly. And I did, because what they thought was a dispute was not a dispute at all. It was a timeline. That afternoon, I drove into town and stopped by the county records office, a low brick building that smelled faintly of paper and air conditioning that had been running too long. Inside, everything was quiet, rows of filing cabinets and digital terminals humming softly in the background. I requested certified copies of the original survey, the easement records, and every document tied to that strip of land. The clerk barely looked up as she processed the request, but when she handed me the stamped copies, I felt the weight of them in my hands, solid, undeniable. Ink, dates, signatures, proof that did not care about asphalt or assumptions. On the drive back, the sun was starting to drop again, casting long shadows across the road that cut straight through the subdivision like a line drawn by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I slowed as I approached the entrance, watching as another car passed through the checkpoint, the guard barely glancing up now, routine already setting in. That was the moment it became clear. They were not preparing for a fight. They were preparing for permanence. And that meant they were not watching the one thing that mattered most. The line they crossed was already written down. They just had not seen it yet. The next morning started quieter than the ones before, and that was how I knew things had shifted again. No new construction noise, no fresh equipment, just the steady rhythm of use. Tires rolling in predictable patterns, engines humming low as people moved through something they no longer questioned. I stood at the kitchen window with the certified documents spread across the counter behind me, the faint smell of paper and ink mixing with the last trace of coffee in the air. Outside, a jogger passed by on the edge of the road, headphones in, completely unaware that every step he took was on land that could change his routine overnight. That was the thing about dependence. It does not feel like a risk until someone removes it. I gathered the documents slowly, stacking them in order, original survey on top, easement records beneath. Each page aligned perfectly like they had been waiting years for this exact moment. My father used to say that timing matters more than force, that knowing when to act is what separates a reaction from a result. I slipped the papers into a worn leather folder and headed out, the morning sun already warming the asphalt enough to release that faint chemical scent again, softer now, but still there if you paid attention. At the entrance, the security guard barely looked up as I passed. No clipboard this time. No question. Just routine. That told me everything had settled into place exactly the way Margaret wanted, which meant it was exactly where I needed it. I drove straight past the subdivision and into town, back to the same county building, the one with the quiet halls and the hum of old systems running in the background. Inside, the air felt cooler, controlled, like nothing rushed here, like everything moved on its own schedule regardless of what people thought outside. I walked up to the counter and placed the folder down, opening it just enough to show the top document. The clerk glanced at it, then at me, then back at the paper, her expression shifting slightly as recognition set in. "You were looking to file a notice?" she asked. I nodded once. "Preliminary enforcement," I said, keeping my voice level. "I want it on record before anything escalates." She took the documents carefully, flipping through each page with practiced precision, checking stamps, signatures, dates, making sure everything aligned with the records they already had. There was no emotion in her movements, just process. That was the part people like Margaret always underestimated. The system does not care who sounds confident. It only cares what is written down. After a few minutes, she stamped the first page, then the second, the sound sharp and final each time, echoing slightly in the quiet room. "This will be logged today," she said, sliding the copies back toward me. "Any related filings will reference this record." I thanked her, closed the folder, and stepped back outside into the Texas heat, the contrast immediate, like stepping from one world into another. On the drive back, I did not rush. There was no reason to. Everything was already in motion now, just not in a way anyone could see yet. When I reached the entrance again, the afternoon traffic had picked up, a steady flow of cars moving through the checkpoint, the guard now chatting casually with a resident like they were part of the same system. I pulled over just long enough to watch, engine idling, the low vibration steady under my hands. This was it, the point where use becomes reliance, and reliance becomes vulnerability. I looked down at the folder resting on the passenger seat, then back at the road stretching ahead, smooth, clean, and completely built on an assumption that was about to be tested. Margaret thought she had created access. What she actually created was exposure. And now, all it would take was one official step to turn everything they built into something they could not legally use. It happened 3 days later, not with noise or warning, but with paper, and paper is always how things really change. I was halfway through my morning coffee when I saw the county truck pull up near the entrance, white paint, official seal on the door, the kind of vehicle people notice without understanding why. 2 men stepped out, both wearing reflective vests, clipboards in hand, their movements calm, routine, like they had done this 1,000 times before. The security guard straightened immediately, posture shifting from casual to uncertain, his eyes tracking them as they walked past without asking for permission. That was the first crack. Authority does not ask other authority for access. It just walks in. I set the mug down on the counter and stepped outside, the air already warming, the faint scent of asphalt rising again under the sun. From where I stood, I could see them stop right at the edge where my property line used to be visible before it was covered, one of them crouching down, brushing the surface with his hand, then checking something on his tablet. They spoke quietly, pointing toward the subdivision, toward the sign, toward the stretch of road that connected everything together. No raised voices. No confrontation. Just confirmation. Within 20 minutes, a third vehicle arrived, this one carrying a stack of metal posts and bright red signage. That was when the movement changed. The workers stepped out and began measuring distances along the roadside, marking points with small sprays of paint, the sharp chemical smell cutting through the warmer air. Residents started to slow down as they passed, windows lowering, heads turning, that subtle shift from routine to curiosity beginning to spread. I walked down toward the entrance at the same steady pace I had used every day, not rushing, not hesitating, just observing. One of the county officials glanced at me briefly, then back at his clipboard, recognition passing without needing words. He already knew. They always do once the record is filed. The first sign went up near the checkpoint, metal post driven into the ground with 3 firm strikes. each hit echoing just enough to draw attention. The red surface caught the sunlight instantly, bold white letters impossible to ignore. Notice of unauthorized access construction. The words hung there, cutting clean through every assumption that had been built over the past week. The second sign followed 10 feet down, then another closer to the subdivision entrance, creating a line that no one could pretend not to see. Traffic slowed to a crawl now, drivers reading, rereading, trying to process something that did not match what they had been told. The guard stepped out of his booth, looking from the signs to the officials, then back toward the houses, uncertainty written across his face like he was waiting for someone to tell him which version of reality to follow. Margaret arrived 10 minutes later, faster than before, her SUV pulling up sharply near the entrance, door opening before the engine even settled. She walked straight toward the officials, her movements controlled but tighter now, voice low, measured, asking questions that did not get the answers she expected. I could not hear every word, but I did not need to. The tone said enough. She pointed at the road, at the sign, at the subdivision behind her, like all of it should outweigh whatever was written on that clipboard. It did not. One of the officials handed her a document, folded once, official seal visible even from where I stood. She took it, unfolded it, and for the first time since this started, she went completely still. No smile, no correction, just silence. Around her, the neighborhood had already begun to shift, people stepping out onto driveways, gathering near sidewalks, voices low, uncertain, trying to understand how something that felt permanent could suddenly be questioned. I stayed where I was, just outside the line where the asphalt met the edge of my land, watching as everything settled into a new kind of reality. Because this was the moment the road stopped being theirs in everyone's mind and started becoming what it had always been on paper. Mine. The silence did not last long, but it was long enough to change everything. Within the hour, the road that had felt permanent just days ago started to look uncertain, like a stage set under the wrong lighting, something solid from one angle and fragile from another. The county officials moved methodically, placing additional notices along the shoulder, each one reinforcing the same message in clean, unmistakable language. Unauthorized, non-compliant, subject to enforcement. The words spread outward like cracks in glass, and you could see it in the way people reacted. Cars slowed before reaching the entrance now, drivers hesitating, reading the signs twice, sometimes 3 times, before continuing through with that slight pause that said they were no longer sure. That pause mattered more than anything, because once doubt sets in, control starts to slip. I walked closer again, stopping just outside the line where the first sign had been posted, the metal still warm from the sun. The air carried a different energy now, less confident, more cautious, like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath without realizing it. Margaret stood near the center of it all, still speaking with the officials, but her voice had changed. It was tighter, more controlled, like she was choosing every word carefully, trying to navigate something she had not prepared for. I watched as she gestured toward the road again, pointing at the houses behind her, at the infrastructure they had built, as if volume and investment could outweigh ownership. One of the officials responded calmly, tapping the document in his hand, then pointing down at the ground beneath them. That was the difference. She was arguing about what had been built. He was pointing at what it was built on. And that was not something she could rewrite. By mid-afternoon, the first real consequence appeared. A delivery truck pulled up to the entrance, slowed, then stopped completely. The driver leaned out his window, reading the sign, then looked toward the guard, who now stood there without his earlier confidence, unsure whether he was enforcing access or witnessing a violation. After a moment, the driver shook his head, put the truck in reverse, and backed away slowly, leaving without entering. It was a small thing, one truck, but it shifted the entire tone. Because access was no longer guaranteed, it was questioned. Residents began to gather in small groups along the sidewalks, conversations low but urgent, hands gesturing toward the signs, toward the officials, toward Margaret, who was now fielding questions she did not have clear answers for. I could see it building, that ripple effect moving from one person to the next, each realization stacking on top of the last. If the road was not authorized, then what else was not secure? If access could be challenged, then what did that mean for everything behind it? I stayed where I was, watching it unfold with the same steady calm I had held from the beginning, because this was not about confrontation. It was about exposure. The truth had not changed. It had just been revealed at the right moment. Late in the afternoon, a final document was posted directly at the entrance, larger than the others, printed in bold, impossible to miss. Pending restriction of access until compliance is achieved. The words hung there, heavier than anything before, because they carried the one thing Margaret had never considered. Removal, not of the road itself, but of the right to use it. I looked down the stretch of asphalt, now filled with hesitation instead of certainty, and let that realization settle in fully. They had built everything on the assumption that access would always be there. They never planned for the moment it would not be. And now that moment was no longer theoretical. It was scheduled. The next morning did not come with noise. It came with stillness, and that was how I knew it was final. The road sat quiet under the early light. No steady stream of cars, no casual movement. Just a few vehicles parked near the entrance like people were waiting for something they did not fully understand yet. The red notices were still there, sharper now in the cool air, their message no longer something to question, but something to accept. I stepped outside and felt it immediately, that shift in atmosphere, the kind that does not need explanation because everyone feels it at the same time. Around 8 o'clock, the county trucks returned, same white paint, same calm pace. But this time they did not stop to measure or observe. They moved with purpose. One of the officials walked straight to the entrance and placed a new sign directly beside the others, larger, heavier, secured deeper into the ground. Access restricted pending legal resolution. The words landed harder than anything before, not because they were louder, but because they were final. A barrier followed not long after, simple metal frame, bright reflective stripes, positioned right where the road crossed fully into my property. It did not block everything, but it did enough. Enough to force every driver to stop. Enough to make every entry a decision instead of a habit. The first car pulled up within minutes, a resident I had seen every day that week, his window rolling down slowly as he read the sign again, like maybe it had changed overnight. He looked toward the guard, who now stood off to the side, no longer checking names, no longer controlling anything, just watching like everyone else. After a moment, the driver turned his wheel and backed away, choosing not to cross that line. That was the moment it settled in for everyone. This was no longer access. This was permission. Margaret arrived shortly after, faster than any day before, her door opening with more force than usual, her steps quicker, less controlled. She walked straight to the officials, documents in hand, voice firm but edged with something new. Urgency. I stayed where I was, close enough to see but far enough to remain outside the center of it. She spoke, pointed, argued in that precise way she always had, but the difference was clear now. The officials did not adjust. They did not negotiate. They simply listened, then responded with the same calm tone, the same reference to what had already been filed, already recorded, already recognized. One of them handed her another document, thicker this time, stamped and dated. She took it, glanced down, and for a second, her posture changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Shoulders lowering slightly, like the weight of something had finally landed. Around her, residents had gathered again, but this time the conversations were not curious. They were concerned. Questions moved from one person to another, faster now, sharper, each one leading to the same realization. If the road could be restricted, then everything behind it depended on something they did not control. I walked down to the edge of the barrier, stopping just short of it, the metal cool against the morning air. The asphalt stretched out behind it, smooth, clean, exactly as they had built it, but now it carried a different meaning. Not ownership, not community, just a surface waiting for permission. Margaret looked up then, our eyes meeting across that short distance, and for the first time since this started, she did not speak. She did not smile. She did not correct anything. She just stood there, holding a piece of paper that said more than any argument she could make. I let the silence sit for a second, then nodded once, not in victory, not in arrogance, just acknowledgement of what had always been. True, they built a road thinking it would give them control. What it actually did was tie everything they had to a line they never bothered to check. And now that line was the only thing that mattered.